Howdy do, neighbor. It's Berean Spirits time once again. The boys have gathered around and they're ready for you. So join in, make comments, and study with the guys as they try to study as the Bereans did in Acts chapter 17. And now, here's the guys.
And welcome to another episode of Berean Spirits. My name is Chris Peltz. I'm the evangelist with the Southside Church of Christ here in Springfield, Missouri. We've got joining us today, as always, Brother Josh Thornhill from the Brookmead Church of Christ over in Johnson City, Tennessee. Josh, how you doing today, brother?
I am good. I am doing good.
Yeah, I'm glad to
I'm
hear.
Here, and I'm still breathing, and I've got my coffee, and I'm good. I'm good.
Absolutely. That's good stuff, man. You just
Yes. Yes.
And that's it. That's all you got to say. That's all right. That's all right. That's all right. Richard's busy. He's posting links trying to invite everybody over to join the live stream and listen in. We got some folks already jumping on and joining us. We appreciate that. We got Richard Dodson from the Kearney Church of Christ up in Kearney, Missouri. You hanging in there, Rich?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
it's a big day for you.
Big day. You got that right. Chiefs play tonight. It's the start of our Super Bowl season. And, you know, I can't wait. We'll have the AFC title game again later this year at Arrowhead, like we always do. And is it our 6th or 7th year in a row? I can't remember what it'll be, but either way, they're selling package deals now already. So, it's nice to be able to get it started again and watch Pat Mahomes and all the guys go down and, beat other teams.
Yeah.
Kind of what we do.
That's oh man. There's been a couple of scares this week.
With what?
Already.
With what?
Travis Kelce hyperextending his knee.
Oh, that's no big deal. We still got Mahomes.
Yeah.
As long as we got Mahomes, we're good. Kelsey's great. Kelce, we love him. But Mahomes is the one that he's the one that writes the Super Bowl checks.
Yeah.
So as long as we
Josh,
got
how's Tennessee off? What kind of start they off to?
Which Tennessee are we talking about?
Tennessee State.
The Volunteers. The only ones that matter.
1-0. So they played Virginia. I mean, nobody basically, but they're 1-0.
Okay.
So.
All right, I got you. Yeah. Well, I don't know if anyone has paid attention, but we, as hot as it has been, it's cooled down a little bit, and then next week highs in the 70s here in Missouri. I am so looking forward to that type of weather. That's going to be awesome. As one person say, they must be paying the preacher. So
I know who says that.
Yeah,
our father-in-law.
Yeah.
Every time we have bad weather and he has good weather, he goes, "You must not be paying the preacher up there."
That's right.
Which is me. So.
Yeah. Well, you can't pay the preacher if you're not having a collection. If you're not passing the plate. What kind of? Isn't that a great transition right there?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know where I come up with these things. This is awesome.
He's just so proud of himself, isn't he, Richard?
I tell you, man, it just doesn't get much better.
We got such big givers up here. We have to pass the bucket.
They're just waiting for you to kick it, I think, is all that is.
All them pennies they drop in there.
Yeah.
Oh, I had a preacher tell me one time that growing up, his mom had a roll of $1 bills. And because they went to this denominational church and they would pass the plate, and then pretty soon the preacher would be like, come on, you guys got more, and they would pass it again. And she got so used to them doing that she had this roll of $1 bills that she would just take a couple of ones, and and put it in the plate because she knew that they were going to be passing it again. So you just pull a couple more ones off that roll and drop it in the plate. And so that's how she kind of got around all that. But you know, a lot of folks, that it seems like that's what they're into, right? They're a lot of folks. One of the biggest complaints they have about churches is they're in it for the money. You know, you get the televangelists, you get all these folks on there that, they always want you to send them money, send us your money. It's all about the money, it would seem. And
It doesn't seem it is all about the money with those guys.
yeah, well, and you look at some of these guys and the money that they make. I think you, le- I don't think you said it on the air last week, but we talked. I know we talked after the.
Joel Osteen.
Yeah, how much was he making a month?
Oh, it was ridiculous. I'll look it up here real quick.
I think it was like $70,000 a month.
I think it was $700,000 a month. Which I don't want to brag or nothing, but that's kind of child's play.
That's yeah. If you were making that much, you could do nothing but child's play, man. But I mean, you got these guys that are flying on their private jets. There's a church in St. Louis years ago where the preacher every Sunday would land on the building in his helicopter and make a grand entrance. And it really just goes to show where the focus is, no doubt about it. I mean, the focus is upon, the sensationalism of society and of culture rather than on the gospel of Christ. But unfortunately, that's where a lot of folks find themselves when it comes to looking for churches. That's what they see. And it's unfortunate because in one sense, not only are we commanded to pass a plate in so to speak, on the first day of the week to take up a free will offering, but it is necessary. I mean, churches do require funds to operate, but the unfortunately a lot of folks try to work outside their means, or they rely upon the world to fund the things that they are trying to do rather than the free will offerings of the members of that congregation, which is what we're going to talk about. But one thing is for certain, free will offerings is not something new for the New Testament. Even in the Old Testament, they had free will offerings. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9 talks about honoring the Lord with with the substance of your possessions. Exodus 35, there was a free will offering that was commanded so that they could build the tabernacle and all the things in it. In fact, they gave so much that in Exodus 36, Moses had to tell them, stop giving. We've got everything that we need. You don't need to give anymore. And so there were certainly principles. Even going back to the book of Genesis 28, I think it was, where was it Abraham who said that he was going to give a tenth of all that he had, and maybe that was to Melchizedek when he gave a free will offering. And so, that is something that we see throughout the scriptures. Genesis 28 and verse 22 is the text I was referencing there. But nevertheless, we see the free will offerings being commanded, being offered, Old and of course in the New Testament especially. So, but there are some things that I think we need to consider talking about passing the plate. Authority, obviously. Why don't we have fundraisers? Why don't we have bake sales? Why don't we, appeal to the community or grants or other things or other people in order to fund the work that we do? Why aren't we doing those things as a local church? Especially when you see all these religious groups around us that are in fact doing those very things. And so I think that's part of what we're going to get into today. Richard, is there something specific that you wanted to start with this morning?
Well, when you were talking, I was thinking about the the old widow woman.
Man, Mark chapter 12.
Yeah, that's who I was thinking about, because she was a Jew and hers was a free will offering.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it goes back. I mean, it's not just tithing, as some people try to put it, but when we're talking about the collection, there's a lot to be said, and probably a good place to start is, like you said, and that's authority. Where do we go to even have such a thing, have such a practice? And of course, everybody goes to 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. And I guess that's a good place to start. Now, concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you are also to do, which tells me, he's telling churches to do this. On the first day of every week, each one of you is to put something aside and store it up, which, by the way, that sounds like a treasury, as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. So right there, they're talking about putting money aside for the work of the church. And that's pretty good authority, I think, for having a collection on the first day of the week.
Yeah. There's a couple of things I want to say about 1 Corinthians 16. First of all, the when I come, that's not talking about Christ. That's Paul. Paul's writing that. He's talking about when he comes to Corinth. I've heard a lot of folks talk about, that we don't have a collection when Christ comes. When Christ comes, folks, everything in this world will be burned up with a fervent heat. It will be no more. That is not talking about there will be no need for any type of collection at all. But yeah, as you've prospered, I mean, that it is something that you've determined in your heart according to that particular text, but it was done on the first day of the week. That's very specific upon the, the first day of the week when that was taken up. So that definitely has authority there. But Josh, even going back to Mark 12 in verse 41, with that widow who gave those 2 mites, probably one of the biggest things that I see in that particular text is the fact that here Jesus was watching. Jesus was concerned about giving. Jesus was paying attention to our giving. He made it a point that she gave more than all the others because she gave of her means and not of her abundance. But the fact is, he was watching. He was paying attention to it, and I think the same is true today, right? So not only does he give us authority and lay it out, but he's watching. He's paying attention to what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard folks say this, and I know there was one guy I've listened to, not for religious things, but I don't want to mention his name because he's not a Christian, but he was talking about, finances and such, and the fact that churches, we have a responsibility to give. And I know one thing you're going to hear from a very denominational standpoint is that the church doesn't need the money. And they're approaching it from the perspective of churches that have fundraisers, churches that have these massive organizations that can funnel funds to wherever they need them. They can get money in a variety of different ways. If we're talking about the Lord's church does need your funds. And I want that to be abundantly clear. But the guy is saying, well, the church doesn't need money. God doesn't need money. That's true. And we can't offer God money. He doesn't have anything to do with it. And yet God commands us to give. And I think this guy pointed out an interesting point that God is a giver. God freely gives to his people. And so when we give, we have an opportunity to partake in a bit of God's character. Freely giving of ourselves to a need or to help others who are in need. We are partaking in the character of God when we do so. That's a very godly characteristic that we display in that regard. And so it is important to God. And I think you see that not just there in Mark 12, you also see that in Matthew 25, in that judgment scene where the righteous and the wicked are being judged, and the righteous are being blessed, because he says, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. They gave to those who had need, and those who are condemned are those who didn't. And so giving is an important principle throughout all of the New Testament. And if I could come back to 1 Corinthians 16 for a moment before I pass the baton back, going back to the idea of the fact that, the need, a lot of people, even Christians, will point out that 1 Corinthians 16 is a instruction given to a need. You have brethren in Jerusalem who have a need, and Paul is collecting funds. He had Macedonia pledging a great deal, even beyond their ability, but also he's urging the Corinthians to take advantage of their opportunity to bless their brethren with this need by giving them funds to help them. And so a lot of people say, well, if we don't have a need, we don't need a collection. There's a need. There is a need. As long as there are men who are preaching the gospel, there is a need, because there are men all over this country who are struggling to get the support that they need to preach the gospel. And so there is a need. And I know one church may be able to comfortably support the man who is working with them. But if you gave a little more, if you had a little more, you'd be able to also help out other men. And I know there are churches who are supporting 10 plus preachers in the brotherhood, in their work in the gospel. And so there is a need. And I don't ever want people to think that the church doesn't need it or there is no need. There is a need. There is a huge need for the preaching of the gospel to be supported in this country. And we need to not take that lightly.
Yeah, I want to jump on that 1 Corinthians 16 point as well for just a minute, because I hear more and more people seemingly grabbing on to a statement that, and I don't know who started it. I don't know where it originated.
It was
And
Richard.
I don't know why, but there's this thought that 1 Corinthians 16 is only for a specific need that was happening in Jerusalem with the famine, with things that were going on, and trying to take care of that need. And one of the things that we stress is context, right? Looking at passages that were before, looking at passages that come after. And if you continue in 1 Corinthians 16, you will find that that church in Corinth had means to provide for a lot more than the needs of brethren in Jerusalem. Just a few verses later, he talks about when Timothy comes to you, and he tells them, and I want you to help Timothy. Right. And then of course, Paul is wanting to come as well, and that they might be able to help him also. And so even within the context of 1 Corinthians 16, what they're going to be providing and what they're going to be doing is not not just for a specific situation happening in Jerusalem. It was for providing for various things, including helping Timothy on his travels, helping Paul on his travels. If you look at the context, those things are included. And so we need to be really careful and stop looking at 1 Corinthians 16 and put it in a realm of, they were providing for just this one specific purpose or need. That's just not true. It is not true. And some folks have grabbed hold of it as though it is and proclaim it as though it's fact, and they disregard the clear passages that come after that.
And
To
they would
add to
that they would be making that specific authority.
They
And
would
so
be.
that's right. And that means to use those funds for any other reason suddenly become wrong because you would be violating specific authority. And you're right, Chris. The whole point of that passage uh, is to show that money needs to be ready for the work of the church. That's the way I understand it. Money needs to be ready for the work of the church. And so that's why it's to be done every week, is so that this money can be collected. And when the opportunity arises, we're ready to go. Now, I just want to add something real quick to what Josh was saying. Uh, no church should ever be to the point where we don't need any money because, like Josh said, there's a need. If you're not using the money that you have in your treasury, and this time it doesn't go to the point of what we're talking about, but if that church is not using the money that's in their treasury, then they are burying the talent that the Lord gave them. And they're going to give an account for that. Money is a tool, and money needs to be used. And it needs to be used lawfully, according to the scriptures, but it definitely needs to be used. And it's like us. Well, I mean, it'd be like us sitting back getting paid not to preach. Well, that's what churches are doing with their money. Their money's not working for them, and that's something that the Lord has blessed them with to be able to help carry out the work of the church. So it needs to be put to work. Anyway,
Absolutely.
that's my
Yeah. No, I mean that's right. I mean, a lot of folks. I mean, listen, of any congregation that has been through situations where you've had some calamity, some disaster, and huge bills that come in, and you needing the funds to take care of that. First of all, relying upon God is something that we need to do. We need to trust that the Lord will provide, no doubt. um, but I mean, we've been through that. We've here specifically, we've had certain things that have happened where we've had to replace certain things. When a church owns a building, there's cost related to that, right? But also when it comes to preachers, when it comes to material, when it comes to providing teaching material, when it comes to providing these things to those around us, that those things cost money, right? The equipment, even if you're like, well, we can print it ourselves, okay, you still have to buy a printer, a computer, you still have to buy the paper, the ink. There's still things that have to be provided for, that has to be paid for. So there are always expenses, there's always cost of operation to work. That's just the nature of things. And to fulfill the commands that we have, not only to worship, right? To even if we didn't own a building, we'd have to, either rent a place or we have to go somewhere, um, you know, be in a place, and whatever else needs to be provided in order to carry out having unleavened bread and fruit of the vine. You can't just go to the grocery store and say, oh, we're a church, so we have to have this, you need to give it to us. It doesn't work that way, right? I mean, those things cost money. And so so that's part of some of those expenses that we have. And of course, Paul in First Corinthians chapter 9 talks about, you know um, and as well as Second Corinthians, but talks about receiving funds from local churches. Philippians chapter 4. I mean, just over and over again, he talks about being supported by local churches, and so churches definitely have a need to provide, and not stockpile. Isn't that what happened with the parable of the talents? There was somebody who decided, I'm just going to store it away.
Yeah, the
Right?
man with one talent. But
God was not pleased.
no, he's not. And the thing is, even the Lord's Supper costs money. Think about it. The Lord's Supper costs money. I mean, everything that we do is going to cost some money. And that's just that's part of the work of the church. which I know a lot of, we probably ought to do a show on what constitutes the work of the church, but needless to say, it's not cheap, and it's not free. Um, we try to provide the gospel as free as we can, but it still needs to be supported. So yeah, all these things cost money, and so again, it goes back to the question, how is it going to be funded? And the only passage I know we can go to is 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2, where a collection was instructed, and it was regarding, yes, needy saints, but that is part of the work of the church. And so that gives us clear evidence on how the Lord expects his work to be funded, and that is through the saints giving as they've been prospered on the first day of the week.
So one real quick, and Josh, I want to throw it to you in here just a second. But first of all, establish that giving is an act of worship. All right, a lot of folks want to remove it from an act of worship. It is worship. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9, I referenced earlier. Honor the Lord with your substance. Right? Honor the Lord with your substance. And first fruits of all your increase. All right, so that's what that passage tells us. That shows us that when we're honored, we're glorifying God. We are worshiping God when we give. But not only that, in the New Testament, we are not told to tithe. All right, so I think those are two things specifically that I hear today, that people either they want to proclaim that we tithe. Now, some people use the word tithe just to represent giving and not what it truly means, a tenth or 10%. They just talk about, oh yeah, we are to tithe, and they just mean that we are to give offering. Um, but literally, it means a tenth, and so we are not, given a set amount or percentage that we're to give in the New Testament. And so, that, or the idea of the fact that giving is worship. If you want to touch on either one of those or something else, Josh, go ahead.
Um, yeah, I think that the tithe, of course, was a very specific instruction in the New Testament or the Old Testament, and of course, we don't have the tithing instruction given in the New Testament. We have a different command, and I think the difference is we're not given instructions as to any particular amount. God wants it to be a free will offering, an offering that's given from our heart. And as far as the giving being a part of worship, I think there is something to be said, and as we already described, as giving being a part of God's character, and we're honoring Him as we are giving, especially as we're giving back a portion of the blessing that we've received from Him as good stewards, returning to Him a blessing. But I also think that there's a sense of sacrifice associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
You look at some of the sacrifices of the Old Testament, they were to be the very best that people had to offer. I'm giving the first fruit of my flock, or I'm giving the first fruit of the ground, or I'm giving the very first. And so there's a sacrifice associated with that. You think you've got 10 bulls and you could get a ton of money for this one, and the other ones are good, but this one's exceptional. You're sacrificing that profit to give to the Lord, and I think that sacrifice is one of our offerings that we bring before the Lord. I think the New Testament would describe that as some of those spiritual sacrifices that we offer.
Mm-hmm.
Not that we're literally killing bulls to offer them to the Lord, but we're giving of ourselves. We're giving of our means to give back to the Lord so that His work can continue. And in a sense, we're taking part in the Lord's work in that sense.
Romans 12, right, verse 1 and 2, offer yourselves as a living sacrifice. And David, going back to the Old Testament, 2 Samuel 24, in verse 24. So 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 24, Samuel was going to offer a sacrifice to God. And here was somebody who was ready and willing, said, here, take this, offer this, I'll give you this. And David said, oh, no, listen, I can't offer something, right? I can't sacrifice something that costs me nothing. Right. This isn't mine. This is yours. I will have to pay. I'll buy it from you. I'll pay it. So it's mine, but I can't give to the Lord something that doesn't cost me anything. And I think throughout even then into the New Testament, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1-5, when the Macedonians that you referenced earlier, Josh, they, we are told that they went beyond their means, gave beyond their means, but they were able to do that because they gave themselves first to the Lord, right? And so our focus, just as we talked last week when we talked about work, our focus, even when it comes to giving, needs to be on the Lord, on His work, glorifying Him, magnifying Him, spreading the gospel, doing His will, and helping the congregation that we're a part of to do the work that it has been given to do.
Well,
Richard?
that's what I was thinking of, 2 Corinthians 8. And you know, it giving should not be a reluctance. I mean, I think the Macedonians are a good example, and something we need to apply to our giving, because if you look at 2 Corinthians 8, verse 1-5, um, they begged earnestly for the favor of taking part. That they saw it as an honor and a privilege, and they wanted to do this. But even before they did it, as Chris said, they first gave themselves to the Lord. And he says, then by the will of God to us. So yes, I mean, that's part of our giving. We First of all, we should long for the opportunity to be able to do it. And then we should be praying for the opportunity to be able to give. And then we need to make sure that we have given ourselves to the Lord. If we've done that, then the amount we give is not even going to be consequential, because we're going to be giving as we should, because we're already in. We've given ourselves to the Lord. And so what we give is just going to be reflective. Well, it'd be like the old widow woman that we talked about in Mark 12, I believe, where she gave all she had. How was she able to do that? Because she first gave herself to the Lord. She had all her faith in Him. She didn't have her faith in money. She put her faith in God. And so that's how she was able to do it. That's how the Macedonians were able to do it. That's how we should do it. But needless to say, we need to make sure, and this is important, because I know there's gospel preachers out there. I know of a gospel preacher who would not give as he should have because he felt like the church wasn't in need. Uh, boy, we really got some things wrong when that's taken place. Uh, if there's not a need, preacher needs to be preaching on where the needs are and letting them know about it. But that should never be reflective of our giving, because, as Chris pointed out, we never know what's going to come up. There could be an unexpected event happen where there's going to be a need for a lot of money. But we need to make sure that our giving is reflective of what we see with the Macedonians. Give yourself to the Lord first and pray. Pray that you'll have the opportunity to do this, because it is an honor. Definitely an honor.
Yeah. Yeah. Acts 20, verse 35, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And that, I think that rings true in so many ways. And one of the areas we get ourselves in trouble, and Josh, I mean, if you wanted to speak to this some, is churches get caught up. We've talked about churches who have plenty, and and how there's that danger in just storing up and not using that money. But then there are those that they get themselves in trouble because they do more than they can afford. They do more than they have the means to provide for themselves, and and that causes them to try to find out, how are we going to fund this? How are we going to do this? And so, what about that attitude, and also the what is expected of a local church with the means that it has? Right? Because maybe that's something that people aren't looking at and considering, because you look around us and you see all these huge things and big works and all the activities that these churches have going on, radio programs and all these other things that cost so much money, and you have churches that can't do that, but they want to, and then they start scrambling and trying to come up with ways to do that, or the means to do that, and they just don't have it. What are they supposed to do?
Well, first of all, I would appreciate, the congregation that wants to do more. That desire, I think that's a very good desire, to see that there is more to do and have a desire to do more. I think if more congregations and churches had that attitude, we'd be a whole lot better off. But I think there's a principle in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, maybe it's chapter 8, where
It's
Paul
9.
is dealing with the church in Corinth, and of course the fact that he had instructed them to gather the funds, and when he was going to meet with them, or when he came to them, he was going to gather those and then take them along with him to Jerusalem. But one of the points that he makes there is that churches are going to be judged based upon what they're capable of doing. So you have, let's say you have a church A over here who's able to support 15 preachers, and you've got church B over here who's barely able to provide enough for their own preacher. Church B is not going to be judged for what church A is doing. Church B is going to be judged on the abilities that church B has. And it's the same thing individually. I'm going to be judged based upon the talents that I've been given. And so, particularly as one who's a preacher of the gospel, I'm going to be judged based upon how faithfully I carry out that task. Somebody may not have the ability to preach the gospel, and God's not going to judge them for that. And so, you see that these churches are responsible for what they have the ability to be able to do. And so God recognizes that people have, and churches have, different abilities. And, you might have just a smaller area. If you have a town of 3,000 people, he's not going to expect, a 350 member group there. But are they doing the best with what they have and using the talents that they do have to the glory of God, and to bringing, advancing the kingdom of God? I think there's an important thought there. And I do want to add, though, that it does cost money to do the work of the church, and we've emphasized that already. But when you stick to the work that God has given, the church doesn't need the type of money that some of these denominational nations do to put on some of the programs they're putting on. Now, I'm not saying we couldn't use it, but a lot of reasons why these denominational churches need so much money is because they got all these programs and all these things that they're dabbling in that aren't part of the work of the church. And we don't need to be involved in that. And so we don't need the bake sales. We don't need the other stuff that they're taking part in, because if we just do the work that we've been given, we're not going to be, needing the great sums of money that they are needing in order to do the unscriptural tasks that they're trying to undertake.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we don't see churches having fundraisers, right? Or bake
Right.
sales or anything like that. It was free will offerings on the first day of the week. Even in Acts 4 and 5 and 6, I guess 5 and 6, Acts 5 and 6, where they would come and they would lay, some things at the feet of the apostles. Barnabas had sold a piece of land and came and gave every proceed that he made from that, to the church in Jerusalem. And so that, some people are able and willing to do that kind of thing, and others are not. And that's fine. But what are you doing with what you have? Even when it comes to giving, Richard, a lot of folks, I hear from people of the world all the time, well, if I could win the lottery, I would, I would do so much more. I would do this, I would do that. And sometimes Christians have an attitude of, well, if I only had more, I could do so much more. And this is the same concept Josh was talking about with local churches. Rather than being judged on what you don't have and what you can't do, you will be judged on what you are doing with what you have. Right? I mean, what are you putting towards the work of the Lord? What are you using the means that you have for? And that's what's expected of you. Not going beyond. Granted, the Macedonians were praised because they went beyond their means, right? And sometimes it's hard to grasp how that is even possible, but they wanted to help so bad that maybe they went without, right? They neglected their own needs, perhaps. Maybe they went, instead of 3 meals a day, they went down to 2 meals a day just so they could help others to have one. However it was done, they worked with what they had, and that's what's expected of us. And how much do we want to? I mean, it is a matter of want, right? Wanting, not rather want as in what can we get out of it, but how much? What do we desire to give? That's what the free will offering is all about.
We might think, if I won the lottery and I had $40 million, I would help out that struggling church, and I'd help them have a nice building, and I'd help out these preachers, and I'd do this and I'd do that. Okay, I don't have $40 million, but I have 100. What are you doing with that?
Yeah, exactly.
And the principle is, he who is faithful in little is faithful in much.
Exactly. Richard?
I was going to say, I think that we are many times limited because of what we talked about earlier with the Macedonians first giving themselves to the Lord. When we are committed to something, we think about things. Um, I had an uncle who built his house, and I remember how, his wife, my aunt, would tell me how he'd wake up in the middle of the night and get the blueprint out because he was thinking about something, and he was totally focused on it, and he was thinking about it all the time. And when you look at what the Macedonians were doing and how they wanted to take part, and they begged, for to be able to do so, I picture them like my uncle, as someone who is totally focused on something and wanting something to happen. And I would hope that we could all relate to that, because we should be thinking as individual Christians, and not just the church. We should be thinking about, boy, what we could do this, or we could do that. We could, different works that we could do, and then start thinking about, well, how can we fund it? And like for instance, I'll just give you an example. Uh, at Carney, I really wanted to have a radio show. I really wanted to do that, but the cost was just too great. But so I started praying about it. Lord, help me be able to get this radio, get this thing off the ground. And, through different means, different things happened, but our contribution went up. But I was also able to get a pretty good deal at the radio station. But in time, the Lord enabled that to take place. So, we need to start thinking about the Lord's work as if it is our work. and taking part in it and start thinking about, what do we want to do in promoting the gospel? And then start praying about it and watch the Lord. I mean, if the Lord wants it, he'll make sure it gets funded. But let's start thinking about what we can do to promote the gospel, because many times we are limited by our own imagination, because we look at what's in the treasury and we think, well, we can only do this and this and this. No, don't limit yourself like that. With the Lord, all things are possible. Think about what you want to do and then pray about it and go out and try to make it happen.
And make sure it's an authorized work.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
a
I know that's a
radio,
given with you, but not with everybody.
no, but with a radio show, I think is,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, you'd be surprised. And I'm just using that as an example. But, we really need to start thinking larger. Like when we started this work, I never dreamed it would go as far as what we've seen it go, but it has. And I've seen other people's work on this online do this as well. Uh, we need to start thinking like that. We need to think bigger. When the Lord says take it to the whole world, take it to the world. Find out a way to do it. Think about how you can do that, and start praying about it.
Josh, you got any last thoughts for today?
I was first going to bring up this comment by
I think
Brother
we go for
Ron. We've kind of referenced this principle in 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 12. If there's first a willing mind, it is accepted according to what one has and not according to what one does not have. And so appreciate him bringing that up for us. Thank you, brother.
That goes along with what I was just saying.
Yeah, it does. It sounds almost exactly like what you were saying.
Well, yeah. Ron was my preacher, when I was a young guy, so that's probably why.
That's possible.
It says a lot about Ron's age, doesn't it? Isn't that sad?
Anyway, I think again, there's always going to be a need, and I think we need to have the mindset that we are part of the kingdom, and part of having a kingdom focus is to help the kingdom spread in whatever means we might have. And so if we can do more to give to a group or a preacher or whatever in order to help them in the kingdom, by all means, and you're only going to benefit yourself eternally in doing all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What bad thing can happen? I mean, really, what bad thing happens by you giving money to the Lord? What is the bad in that? I mean, if you do it like the Bible says, you give yourself to the Lord, and then you give of your means as you've been prospered to the Lord. What's bad about that? I'm at a loss. But yet, I was at a church one time when the plate was passed. There was a man in the middle who pretended to put money into the plate, and he put his hand in the plate. There was no money in his hand. He just made everybody think he was putting money in, and he let the plate go by. And, I don't know if he had money to give or not. He might not have had money to give, but if you have money to give and you're hoarding it, like we see in Acts 5 with Ananias and Sapphira, then that didn't turn out too good. They died. So again, I go back and say, what's bad? What can possibly be bad about following this pattern with God?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. Yep. All right. Well, folks, we appreciate everybody who tunes in and listens to Berean Spirits. Check us out on the podcast as well. If you want to listen to it there, share it out with all your friends and family. Let them know about the program every Thursday as we go live here on Facebook, on YouTube, and post it on podcast as well. Until next time, remember to search the scriptures with Berean Spirits.
Well, folks, that's all for today. Don't worry. Lord willing, the guys will be back next week for another Bible study on Berean spirits. Until then, let the guys hear from you. Drop them some email at bereanspirits@gmail.com. They'd love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep studying that Bible.